Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are looking at a couple of books that are, well, they're basically the foundational texts for how medicine works at a molecular level.
We've got the big ones on the table. Katzung and Trevor's Basic and Clinical Pharmacology, and of course the Titan, Goodman and Gilman's The Pharmacological Basis of Therapeutics.
Yeah, the heavy artillery, for sure. And we need them because we are diving into a question that I think most of us just take for granted.
Absolutely.
You get a headache, you swallow a pill, that's the input. 30 minutes later, your headache is gone. That's the output.
Right, input, output. The user interface is so simple, isn't it? Just take with water.
But that messy part in the middle, the black box between the drug getting into your system and you actually feeling better, that's a whole universe of microscopic interactions.
And that's what we're here to unpack. We're opening that box. That is pharmacodynamics.
So in our last deep dive, we talked about pharmacokinetics, which was all about the journey.
The logistics, yeah. How the body acts on the drug, how the package gets from the warehouse to your front door.
Today, pharmacodynamics is the reverse. It's how the drug acts on the body.
It's what happens when you finally open the package. As Goodman and Gilman puts it, it's the study of the biochemical, cellular, and physiological effects of drugs and their mechanisms of action.
And both sources make this really fundamental point right from the get-go. Drugs don't invent new abilities for your body.
That is the core philosophy. It's so important. You can't take a pill and suddenly be able to, photosynthesize.
Right, no growing wings?
Exactly. Drugs are modulators. They find processes that are already running in your cells, and they just turn the volume up or down. They modify the rate or magnitude of what's already there.
We're basically hacking a pre-existing system.
We are. We're just sending in new instructions.
Now, to keep us grounded and to stop this from becoming just a pure biochemistry lecture, I want to anchor our whole conversation today in a real-world scenario. It's a clinical case study from Katzung.
Oh, this is a great one. It's a classic for a reason.
It really is, because it shows how understanding this stuff saves a life and how not understanding it can be catastrophic.
Right.
So here's the scene. A 51-year-old man is rushed into the emergency department. He's in acute respiratory distress. He's gasping. You can hear him wheezing from across the room. His heart is just pounding.
Sounds like a textbook severe asthma attack. The airways are clamped shut. Bronchoconstriction.
That's exactly the diagnosis they make. So the team does what you'd expect. They reach for the emergency go-to drug, epinephrine.
The fight-or-flight hormone. It's a powerful tool.
They give it to him, and it works like a charm. Within minutes, his airways relax and open up. He can breathe again. The immediate crisis is over.
A beautiful thing to see. Epinephrine hits the beta-2 receptors in the lungs' smooth muscle and just tells them to relax, opens the pipes right up.
Okay, but here is where it gets interesting. Here's the mystery. While they're getting his history, the doctors learn that he also has a mild hypertension.
Yeah, high blood pressure.
Yeah.
Common enough.
And for that blood pressure, his primary care doctor had him on a drug called propranolol.
Ah, okay. I see it now.
You see the smoking gun?
I see the smoking gun. The whole case just clicked into place.
Because the ER physician sees propranolol on the chart and basically stops in his tracks. He tells the patient, this drug is probably why you're here.
Yeah.
He immediately discontinues the propranolol and switches him to something else, a drug called verapamil.
A very, very smart switch. A crucial pivot.
So here's the puzzle we have to solve today. Propranolol and verapamil both lower blood pressure. To an outsider, they're both just blood pressure meds. But one of them was literally suffocating this man, and the other one is safe for him. Why?
You can't answer that just by looking at the outcome, right? Both lower blood pressure. You have to go deeper. You have to understand the mechanism.
You have to open the black box.
You do. You have to understand that propranolol, while it was helping his heart, was waging a secret war on his lungs. And we're going to solve this using the grammar of pharmacodynamics. Receptors, selectivity, and this whole idea of agonism versus antagonism.
Okay, so by the end of this, we'll all be able to see that chart and know exactly why the ER doc made that call.
That's the goal.
So our takeaways for you today are pretty clear. We want you to understand receptors as these cellular decision points. We're going to unpack the whole spectrum of drug action agonists, antagonists, the weird ones in between.
And we're going to finally nail down the difference between potency and efficacy. They are not the same thing.
Not at all. And then we'll get into how a tiny signal on the outside of a cell gets turned into a massive response on the inside. And finally, why patients are so different, why the textbook dose doesn't work for everyone.
But a quick disclaimer, this is a conceptual map. We're giving you the framework. you absolutely still need to go read the source material. Katzung's chapter on drug receptors and pharmacodynamics and Goodman and Gilman's chapter on the molecular mechanisms of drug action have all the detail.
We're the guide for the territory, but you still have to walk it.
Well said.
Okay. Let's start at the absolute ground floor, the fundamental unit of interaction, the receptor. You called it the cellular ear.
I like that metaphor. It's the part of the cell that is listening for a chemical signal. Goodman and Gilman is very precise here. A receptor isn't just anything a drug bumps into.
Right, because drugs bind to all sorts of stuff in the blood, like albumin, for instance.
Exactly. And Goodman and Gilman has a special name for things like albumin. It calls them acceptors.
Acceptors, okay.
Think of serum albumin as a taxi. The drug gets in, it binds to the seat, and it gets a ride through the bloodstream. But the taxi driver doesn't do anything different. The albumin's function doesn't change. It's just a passive carrier.
So an acceptor binds, but that's it. It's a parking spot.
It's a parking spot. A receptor, on the other hand, binds the drug and then initiates a chain of events. It transduces the signal. A binding to a receptor is a decision point for the cell. It has to change its behavior.
Okay, so receptor means action. Acceptor means inaction.
That's the core distinction. And you know what's amazing is that we knew receptors had to exist conceptually long before we could actually isolate one and look at it.
We inferred their existence from the effects of drugs.
We did. Now we just sequence a genome and can find thousands of them.
So the classic analogy for this interaction is lock and key. The drug is the key, receptor is the lock. How well does that hold up today?
It's a good starting point. It gets the idea of specificity across, but it's a bit outdated. Goodman and Gilman really pushes for a more dynamic model.
Because lock and key sounds very rigid. Two hard surfaces clicking together.
And biology is never rigid, right? It's warm, it's wet, it's constantly jiggling and changing shape. So the better model is induced fit.
Induced fit.
Yeah. The idea is that as the drug molecule, the ligand, approaches, the receptor protein actually changes its own shape slightly to form a more perfect embrace around it. It's a dynamic handshake, not a key falling into a slot.
So they mold to each other.
They do. And this whole interaction, this molecular handshake, is governed by two really, really important concepts, affinity and specificity.
Let's break those down. Affinity.
Oh,
It sounds like it just means how much the drug likes the receptor.
That's the intuitive way to think about it, and it's not wrong. But pharmacologically, it has a precise mathematical definition. It's the strength of that reversible binding.
And we measure it with something called the KD.
The dissociation constant, KD. And Katzung defines this really well. The KD is the concentration of free drug at which half of the available receptors are occupied.
Okay, so it's a measure of concentration.
Right, and you have to remember it's an inverse relationship, which can be tricky. A low KD means you need very little drug to occupy half the receptors.
Which means the drug is really sticky.
It's incredibly sticky. It has a high affinity. Think of it like a powerful magnet. Even if there are only a few drug molecules around, they'll find that receptor and latch on tight. Low KD equals high affinity.
Versus a drug with a high KD, which would be low affinity.
Yeah, that's more like a post-it note. It's not very sticky. You need to flood the area with tons of them to make sure one of them actually stays put.
Okay, so that's affinity, the strength of the grip. What about specificity? This is the magic bullet idea, right? We want a drug that only hits our target.
That is always the goal. But as Goodman and Gilman soberly reminds us, no drug is perfectly specific. It's never an absolute. It's always a matter of degree.
Because as you increase the dose, the drug starts to get sloppy.
That's a great way to put it. A drug might have a really high affinity for receptor A. It loves it. But it might have a very low, but not zero, affinity for receptor B and C.
So at a normal dose, it ignores B and C.
Right. But if you take an overdose, you flood the system with so much drug that just by sheer numbers, it will start binding to those low affinity sites. And that's often where we see side effects and toxicity. Specificity is always concentration dependent.
There's a brilliant example of this in Goodman and Gilman with the drug Sotalol. It has to do with mirror image molecules.
Oh, the enantiomers. This is such a cool illustration of receptor specificity. So a quick chemistry refresher. Some molecules are chiral. They can exist in two forms that are mirror images of each other, like your left and right hand.
They're made of the same atoms, but arranged differently in 3D space.
Exactly. We call them enantiomers. And sotalol is sold as a racemic mixture, which means it's a 50-50 mix of the left-handed version and the right-handed version.
Okay.
Now, both the left-hand and the right-hand molecule are equally good at blocking potassium channels in the heart. That's one of its antiarrhythmic effects.
So for that target, it doesn't matter which hand you use.
Doesn't matter at all. But sotalol is also a beta blocker, and it turns out only the L-enantiomer, the left-handed molecule, is a potent beta blocker.
So the right-handed one doesn't work on that receptor.
It doesn't touch it, it just bounces off. The beta receptor is so exquisitely shaped that it can tell the difference between a left and a right hand. It's a perfect demonstration that receptors are not just binding sites, they are incredibly specific three-dimensional structures.
That's amazing. A tiny change in stereochemistry completely alters the drug's pharmacodynamic profile.
Fundamental.
Okay, so we have the receptor, this dynamic specific protein, and we have the drug. But not all drugs that bind do the same thing. This gets us into the real vocabulary of pharmacodynamics, agonists and antagonists.
Right. And to really understand this, we need to upgrade that old lock and key model again. We need to think about what's called the two-state model of receptor activation.
This is a big concept in Kitsung, the idea that the receptor isn't just off or on.
Exactly. It's not a simple light switch. Imagine that the receptor protein, even when it's just sitting there in the cell membrane, is constantly flickering. It's fluctuating between two different shapes.
Two different conformations.
Yep. We call them Re for the inactive conformation and Ra for the active conformation.
So even with no drug around at all, the receptor is occasionally just flipping into an on state for a split second.
For a microsecond, yeah. It's a natural equilibrium. For most receptors, the equilibrium heavily favors the inactive state. Maybe 99.9% of the time it's sitting in Re, asleep. But every now and then, it spontaneously flips to Ra and sends out a tiny little signal.
And this explains what's known as constitutive activity, that low-level hum of biological activity in the background.
It's the baseline. Now, here's where the drugs come in. A full agonist is a drug that has a much higher affinity for the raw state, the active shape.
So it prefers to bind to the receptor when it's already on.
But it loves the on state. So when that receptor randomly flickers into the raw shape, the agonist molecule is there, it grabs it, and it stabilizes it in that position. It essentially traps it in the active conformation.
Whoa, okay, that's a huge mental shift. The drug isn't forcing the lock open.
Oh.
It's waiting for the lock to randomly pop open, and then it shoves a doorstop in to hold it there.
That is a perfect analogy. And by trapping more and more receptors in that active raw state, it shifts the whole equilibrium. Suddenly, a huge percentage of the receptors are on, and you get a massive downstream signal. That's a full agonist. It turns the volume knob to 10.
Okay, that makes sense for a full agonist.
Yeah.
So what then is a partial agonist? This is the concept that always seems to confuse people.
It's tricky, but it's so clinically important. Using our model, a partial agonist has an intermediate affinity. It likes the raw state, but maybe not as much as a full agonist does. It doesn't create as perfect of a stabilized complex.
So it's like a wobbly doorstop.
A wobbly doorstop is a great way to think about it. It pushes the equilibrium towards on, but not all the way. It can only turn the volume knob to, say, a 5 or a 6.
So even if I give a huge dose and occupy every single receptor in the body with a partial agonist, I will never get the maximal 10 out of 10 response.
Never. Its intrinsic efficacy is just lower. But here's where it gets really clever and a little bit mind-bending. A partial agonist can sometimes act like an agonist, and sometimes it acts like an antagonist.
Okay, how does that work? Kitsung uses the example of buprenorphine, the opioid.
Buprenorphine is the perfect case study. It's a partial agonist at the mu-opioid receptor. Let's imagine two patients. Patient A is opioid naive. They have no opioids in their system. They're in pain after surgery. We give them buprenorphine.
Okay, it binds to their empty mu receptors. It turns them on partially to a level 5.
Correct. The patient gets pretty good pain relief. The buprenorphine is acting as an agonist, and it's safer than morphine because it has less of an effect on respiratory depression. It can't turn that stop breathing knob all the way up.
Okay, that's scenario 1. It's a pain reliever.
Now, patient B, this person is a heroin addict who has just taken a large dose of heroin. Heroin is a full agonist. Their mu receptors are currently screaming at a level 10.
The system is completely saturated with a full-on signal.
Right. And into the system, we inject buprenorphine. Now, buprenorphine has a very high affinity. It's very sticky, so it starts kicking the heroin molecules off the receptors and binding in their place.
But buprenorphine is only a level 5 signal.
Exactly. You are forcibly replacing a 10 out of 10 drug with a 5 out of 10 drug.
The total signal in the brain plummets from 10 down to 5 almost instantly.
And what do you think that feels like to an addict's brain?
It must feel like sudden, severe withdrawal.
Precipitated withdrawal. It's brutal. In that context, the partial agonist behaved as an antagonist. It lowered the total system output.
That's incredible. So the drug's effect is entirely dependent on the background state of the system you're putting it into.
Context is everything in pharmacology.
Wow. Okay, before we get to the true blockers, there's one more weird category. The inverse agonist.
Ah, the inverse agonist. This one only makes sense if you accept the two-state model and that baseline constitutive activity.
Right, that background hum.
So if a full agonist loves the active raw state, an inverse agonist does the opposite. It has a high affinity for the inactive raw state.
So it finds the receptors that are already asleep and locks them in the off position.
It locks them down, it binds to re and stabilizes it, preventing it from even doing that random spontaneous flickering into the active state.
So it doesn't just block an incoming signal. It actively reduces the baseline signal that was already there.
Yeah.
It turns the volume from 0.1 down to 0.
It silences the room completely. And it's been a surprise to find that many drugs we used to just call antagonists for years, like certain antihistamines or beta blockers, are actually inverse agonists. They don't just block, they actively suppress.
Which finally brings us to the pure antagonists, the blockers.
The blockers. In our two-state model, a true neutral antagonist has no preference. It binds equally well to both the re and the raw conformations.
So it doesn't shift the equilibrium either way.
It doesn't. It just gets in the way. It's like putting gum in the lock. The agonist key can't get in, but the gum itself doesn't turn the lock. It has affinity, but zero efficacy.
And within this category, there's a huge practical distinction between the two main types, competitive and non-competitive.
This is clinically vital. Competitive antagonism is, well, it's a competition. The agonist and the antagonist are both trying to bind to the exact same spot on the receptor.
It's a numbers game.
It's a numbers game.
Yeah.
And crucially, it is surmountable.
You can overcome the block.
Yes. If you just add enough of the agonist, if you flood the system with enough of the on signal, you can outcompete the antagonist by sheer probability and still achieve a 100% maximal response.
So on a graph of the drug's effect, this would just push the curve over to the right.
Exactly. It shifts the dose-response curve to the right. You need a higher concentration of agonists to get the same effect, but the maximum possible effect, the ceiling, is still achievable.
This sounds really important for treating overdoses.
It is. Naloxone for an opioid overdose is a perfect example of a competitive antagonist.
But then you have the other kind, non-competitive antagonism.
Right. This is not a fair fight. This happens in a couple of ways. The antagonist might bind the receptor so tightly forming a covalent bond, basically welding itself on, that it's effectively irreversible.
So it's never coming off.
Not until the cell destroys and recycles that entire receptor protein. Or the antagonist might bind to a completely different spot on the receptor, an allosteric site.
A side door.
A side door. And when it binds there, it changes the shape of the main binding site, so the agonist key doesn't fit anymore, even though the spot is technically empty.
So in either case, no matter how much agonist you pour on,
it doesn't matter. You can't outcompete it. That receptor is taken out of the game. You haven't shifted the curve right. You've pulled the ceiling down. The maximal effect, the Emax, is depressed.
Wow. Okay, so that feels like the perfect pivot point. We keep talking about curves and ceilings and effects. Let's actually formalize that and talk about how we quantify this. The math of medicine.
The dose-response curve, every pharmacologist's favorite graph.
And it almost always has this characteristic S shape, a sigmoid curve.
It does. On the bottom, the x-axis, you have the concentration of the drug, usually on a log scale, so you can see a wide range of doses.
And on the side, the y-axis, you have the effect or the response going from 0 to 100%.
And you see that classic shape. At very low doses, nothing happens. It's a flat line. Then you hit a threshold, and the curve shoots up steeply. This is the dynamic range of the drug.
And then it flattens out again at the top.
It's a plateau. You've hit the maximal effect. Adding more drug at this point does nothing more. It just increases the risk of toxicity.
Now, within this curve are two concepts that are so critical and in everyday language get used completely wrong: potency and efficacy.
This is probably the #1 mistake students make, and it's a really important one to get right.
Okay, let's define them clearly. What is potency?
Potency is all about the dose. It's about how much drug you need to get an effect. It has nothing to do with how big the effect is. It's purely a measure of the drug's concentration.
So it's the position of the curve on that left-to-right axis.
Exactly. We usually define it by the EC50, the effective concentration to produce 50% of the maximal effect. A drug with a curve that's way over to the left is very potent.
So if drug A produces a 50% effect at 1 nanogram, and drug B needs 10 milligrams to do the same thing.
Drug A is much, much more potent.
But, and this is the key question, is it a better drug?
Absolutely not. This is the trap. Potency tells you almost nothing about how useful a drug is clinically. All it really determines is the size of the pill you're going to make. A tiny pill versus a big pill. Therapeutically, who cares?
What we really care about is the other term, efficacy.
Efficacy is the big one. Efficacy is the height of the curve. It's the Emax. What is the maximum possible effect that drug can produce regardless of the dose?
It's the ceiling.
It is the ceiling. Let's say you have 2 painkillers. Drug A is incredibly potent. Its EC50 is in the microgram range, but its maximal effect, its Emax, is only 30% pain relief.
It just takes the edge off.
Right. Now, drug B is not very potent at all. You need a giant 500 milligram horse pull. But its Emax is 100% pain relief. It can completely eliminate severe pain.
Clinically, you're going to choose drug B every time for severe pain.
Every single time. As Katsung states very clearly, the clinical effectiveness of a drug depends on its maximal efficacy, not its potency.
That's such a crucial distinction. Potency is about dose. Efficacy is about effect.
Nail that down and you're ahead of the game.
Now, we're not just measuring the good effects. We also have to measure the bad ones. This brings us to the concept of the therapeutic index.
Right. So now we shift from looking at a graded response in one person to looking at a quantal response in a whole population.
Quantal meaning all or nothing.
All or nothing. Did the patient fall asleep? Yes or no? Did the tumor shrink? Yes or no? And the grim one, did the lab animal die? Yes or no?
Okay.
So we can plot a curve for the dose at which 50% of the population gets the desired effect. That's the ED50, the median effective dose.
And we can plot another curve for the toxic effect. The dose at which 50% of the population experiences a lethal outcome is the LD50.
The median lethal dose. And the ratio between those two numbers, LD50 divided by ED50, gives you the therapeutic index.
And you want that number to be huge.
You want it to be massive. You want the dose that could kill someone to be thousands of times higher than the dose that's clinically effective. Penicillin has an enormous therapeutic index.
Whereas something like warfarin, the blood thinner, or lithium,
They have very narrow therapeutic indexes. The dose that helps is very close to the dose that harms. You have to monitor those patients very carefully.
But Goodman and Gilman throws a bit of a wrench in this, a reality check about the idea of a clean therapeutic window.
Yeah, the index is a single number, an average. The window is the range of concentrations between it works and it's toxic. But the problem is people are variable. The dose-response curves for the therapeutic effect and the toxic effect in a population are not distinct. They overlap.
So what you're saying is the dose that is required to be effective for the most resistant patient might actually be toxic for the most sensitive patient.
That's exactly it. There is no single dose that is guaranteed to be both safe and effective for everybody. That's why the saying is, the dose makes the poison. We start low and go slow.
Okay, that variability is a huge topic we need to come back to. But first, let's connect the dots inside the cell. We've talked about the drug binding to the receptor on the outside, but the actual work of the cell happens on the inside. How does the message get across the membrane?
This is the world of signal transduction. This is how the whisper at the cell surface becomes a shout in the nucleus.
And this is where we meet the undisputed superstars of cell signaling.
The G-protein coupled receptors, the GPCRs, Goodman and Gilman could be a whole book just on these things.
Why are they so important?
Because they're everywhere and they do everything. A huge percentage of our modern drugs target these receptors. They're involved in vision, smell, heart rate, mood, you name it. And the mechanism is just beautiful because it brilliantly solves two key problems: timing and amplification.
Okay, let's take timing first. What controls how long the signal lasts?
It's controlled by a little molecule called GTP. Think of the G protein itself as a molecular egg timer.
An egg timer, okay.
In its resting state, the G protein is bound to a molecule of GDP, which is like a spent battery. When the agonist hits the receptor changes shape and nudges the G protein. This causes the G protein to let go of the old GDP and to grab a fresh molecule of GDP.
The new battery.
The new battery. And as long as it's holding onto that GTP, the G protein is on. It breaks away from the receptor and scoots along the inside of the membrane to activate its target enzyme.
But it doesn't stay on forever.
No, and this is the genius part. The G protein has its own built-in off switch. It has an intrinsic enzymatic activity that slowly hydrolyzes the GTP, breaking it back down into GDP.
So it chews up its own battery.
It slowly drains its own battery, and once the GTP becomes GDP again, click, the timer goes off, the G protein becomes inactive and goes back to the receptor to wait for another signal. The signal is self-limiting.
Wow. So the duration of the signal isn't just how long the drug is bound, it's tied to this internal molecular clock.
Exactly. But in the short time that it's active, before that timer runs out, it performs its other magic trick, amplification.
It gets back to that idea Katzon mentions of spare receptors, doesn't it? The concept that you can get a 100% maximal response from a cell by only activating, say, 10% or even 1% of its receptors.
It sounds like a paradox, right? How can you get a full effect without using all your hardware?
Yeah, how does that work?
The math works because of the cascade. It's not a one-to-one process. One single drug molecule binds to one receptor. But that single active receptor, during its brief lifetime, can bump into and activate not one, but maybe 10 or 100 G proteins.
So right there, you have a 10-fold or 100-fold amplification.
Instantly. But it doesn't stop there. Each of those 100 active G proteins then finds its target enzyme. Let's say it's adenyl cyclase. And one active adenyl cyclase enzyme can churn out thousands of molecules of the second messenger, CMP, per second.
Okay, so let's trace that. We went from one drug molecule to 100 G proteins to literally hundreds of thousands of CMP molecules.
You've gone from a single event at the membrane to a massive flood of signal inside the cell. A whisper becomes a roar, and that is why you don't need to occupy every receptor. The downstream amplification is so immense that activating just a few is enough to saturate the system.
So spare receptors aren't actually extra. They're a reserve capacity that gives the cell incredible sensitivity.
Exactly. It can respond powerfully to even very, very low concentrations of hormone or a drug.
And just briefly, because not everything is a GPCR, what are some of the other major signaling pathways?
Well, you have the receptor tyrosine kinases, or RTKs. These are huge for things like insulin and growth factors. The mechanism is different. Here, the drug causes two receptors to pair up to dimerize.
They hold hands.
They do, and then they phosphorylate each other, which kicks off a whole different cascade inside the cell, often the RAS-MATK pathway, which is heavily involved in cell growth and division.
Which is why it's so important in cancer research.
Absolutely. When that pathway gets stuck in the on position, you get uncontrolled growth. Then you have things like the JAK-STAT pathway for immune signals, and finally you have the really different ones, the nuclear receptors.
These are the ones for steroid hormones.
Right. These drugs are greasy, they're lipophilic, so they don't even need a receptor on the surface. They just slip right through the cell membrane like a ghost.
And find their receptor just waiting inside.
Waiting in the cytoplasm. The drug binds, and the whole complex then travels into the nucleus and binds directly to the DNA to change gene transcription.
And Katzon makes a point about the timeline for these.
It's a completely different timeline. GPCRs are fast seconds to minutes. Nuclear receptors are slow. It takes hours or even days to see an effect because you have to wait for the cell to make new proteins. But the effect is also very long-lasting.
So the receptor type dictates the drug's speed of onset and duration.
The mechanism is the clock.
Okay, so we have the mechanisms, we have the math, we have the whole beautiful logical system laid out. But real life is messy. Let's talk about variability.
The moment the textbook walks into the clinic and gets punched in the face.
Exactly. Why does the standard 10 milligram dose work perfectly for me, do absolutely nothing for you, and make a third person incredibly sick?
There are so many reasons. As Katzon lays out, some are pharmacokinetic. Your liver might just chew up the drug faster than mine. But the pharmacodynamic reasons, the changes at the receptor level, are fascinating.
And a lot of it has to do with the body fighting back.
The body is a master of adaptation. It craves homeostasis. It does not like being pushed around by foreign chemicals. If you constantly stimulate a receptor with an agonist, day after day,
The cells are going to get tired of being yelled at.
it's going to turn the volume down. This is desensitization or tolerance. It can happen in a few ways. The cell can phosphorylate the receptor to make it less responsive, or it can literally pull the receptors off the surface and hide them inside the cell. That's internalization.
Or if it gets really fed up, It just destroys them.
Destroys them completely. That's downregulation. The end result is the same. You now need a higher dose of the drug to get the same effect.
And sometimes this happens really fast, right? There's a special term for that.
Tachyphylaxis, rapid tolerance. The classic example is nitroglycerin patches for angina. If you leave a patch on for 24 hours straight, it stops working. The cell's signaling machinery just gets exhausted. You need a drug-free period overnight to let the system reset.
And this whole process works in reverse for antagonists, for blockers.
It does, and this is where it can get really dangerous. Think about a patient on a beta blocker for high blood pressure for years. Their heart cells are being chronically blocked from seeing their natural adrenaline.
So the cells are starved for a signal.
They're starving. So what do? They build more receptors. They cover their surface with extra beta receptors, trying to catch every last stray molecule of norepinephrine they can find. This is upregulation.
You've created a supersensitive heart.
A heart that is primed and desperate for a beta agonist signal. Now, what happens if that patient suddenly stops taking their beta blocker?
The dam breaks.
The dam breaks. Their normal, everyday level of adrenaline suddenly sees a heart with maybe double or triple the normal number of receptors. You get a massive, exaggerated response. Rebound hypertension, tachycardia, even a heart attack.
Which is why you have to taper patients off those drugs slowly.
You never stop them abruptly.
Now, Goodman and Gilman takes this variability a step further, down to the level of our DNA. We're not all working with the same components. They use a really powerful example concerning heart failure in African-American patients.
This is such a critical piece of modern pharmacogenomics. For a long time, it was observed in large clinical trials that patients of African ancestry with heart failure often had a less robust response to beta blocker therapy than patients of European ancestry.
And for decades, people didn't really know why. They might have just chalked it up to, biological differences or other confounding factors.
But now we know a specific molecular reason. Goodman and Gilman points to common genetic variations, polymorphisms, in a protein kinase called GRK5.
GRK5, what is its normal job?
Its job is to desensitize beta receptors. It's one of the proteins that gets activated to turn down the signal when the receptor is being overstimulated. It's a natural break.
Okay.
It turns out there's a specific variant of the GRK5 gene that is much more common in populations with West African ancestry. And this variant is a gain-of-function mutation.
Meaning the enzyme is hyperactive.
It's hyperactive, it's working overtime, constantly putting the brakes on the beta receptors in the heart. It's a protective mechanism against chronic stress. So these patients essentially have a natural, genetically encoded beta blockade already happening.
Wait a minute, so their own body is already doing the job of a beta blocker at a genetic level?
To a significant degree, yes. Their cardiac signaling is already dialed down, so when a physician comes along and gives them a pharmaceutical beta blocker...
You don't see as big of an effect because you're trying to block a pathway that's already partially blocked.
Exactly. It's not that the drug doesn't work in these patients. It's that their baseline physiology is fundamentally different in a way that alters the drug's effect. It's a beautiful example of how genetics can predict pharmacodynamic response.
That's a complete game changer. It moves us away from one-size-fits-all medicine.
It's the future.
And just to touch on one last type of variability, the most malicious kind, when the target itself fights back. Cancer.
Multi-drug resistance, or MDR. This is a tumor cell evolving in real time.
How does it work?
The cancer cells, under the selective pressure of chemotherapy, can learn to upregulate specific transporter proteins on their cell surface. These are pumps, like the P-glycoprotein pump.
And they just pump the drug out.
They recognize the chemo drug as a foreign toxin, grab it, and use energy to physically eject it from the cell before it can reach its target and do its damage.
It's Darwinian evolution on a microscopic scale.
It's a cellular arms race. But understanding that mechanism is key, because now we can try to design drugs that inhibit the pump itself to make the chemotherapy effective again.
Okay. We have covered an immense amount of ground, from the two-state model to the genetic code. Let's bring it all home. Let's solve the case of our 51-year-old patient in the ER.
Back to the anchor case.
He had asthma, he had high blood pressure, and his doctor put him on propranolol. Let's break it down. Why was that a terrible choice for him?
Because propranolol is a non-selective beta antagonist. Non-selective is the key word. It blocks beta-1 receptors, which are mostly in the heart. Blocking them slows the heart rate and lowers blood pressure. That's the good part.
The intended effect.
Right. But it also blocks beta-2 receptors. And beta-2 receptors are predominantly found in the smooth muscle of the airways in the lungs.
And the job of the beta-2 receptors is to promote relaxation to keep the airways open.
Precisely. An asthmatic patient relies on the baseline tone of their beta-2 system to breathe. Propranolol put the brakes on that system. It clamped his airways shut. It caused his asthma attack.
It fixed his blood pressure by suffocating him.
That's a good way to put it.
So when he gets to the ER, they give him epinephrine. Why does that save him?
Because epinephrine is a powerful, non-selective agonist for all beta receptors. It binds to those beta-2 receptors in the lungs and powerfully activates them. Because propranolol is a competitive antagonist, a high enough dose of epinephrine can outcompete it.
It can surmount the block.
It surmounts the block and forces the airways to dilate.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. And the final piece of the puzzle. Why did the doctor switch him to verapamil for his blood pressure long term?
Specificity. Verapamil is a calcium channel blocker. It lowers blood pressure by relaxing the smooth muscle in blood vessels, which is a wonderful effect. But it does so through a completely different mechanism that has nothing to do with beta receptors.
It stays in its own lane.
It stays in its lane. It doesn't go anywhere near the beta-2 receptors in the lungs. It treats the hypertension without aggravating the asthma. It was the safe, selective choice.
So this whole case hinged on understanding that drugs don't just have one effect. They have a profile of effects based on where their targets are located throughout the body.
Exactly. Pharmacodynamics is systems thinking. It's not just about the one thing you want to fix. It's about predicting all the other things your intervention will touch.
So as we wrap up, what is the big picture here?
The big picture is that pharmacodynamics is the grammar of pharmacology. Once you understand these rules, affinity, efficacy, agonism, transduction, you can look at a new drug you've never seen before and make a pretty good guess about how it's going to behave.
It allows you to reason from first principles instead of just memorizing facts.
Which is what makes a good clinician.
I'll leave you with a final thought on this. We tend to think about medicine as fixing a broken machine. You know, a part is worn out, we put in a new one. But after this conversation, it feels much more like we are interventions in an active, intelligent, adaptive system.
That's a much better framing. We aren't mechanics. We're more like diplomats negotiating with a very complex foreign power that has its own agenda.
And that agenda is homeostasis. The body is constantly working to counteract what we're doing. Upregulation, tolerance, resistance. It's the system pushing back.
It's trying to maintain its stability.
Yeah.
And our job is to nudge that stability in a therapeutic direction without causing it to crash.
A constant dynamic negotiation.
That's what it is.
Well, if you want to read the terms of that negotiation in full detail, you have to go to the source. Katsung, Chapter 2, Drug Receptors and Pharmacodynamics, gives you that perfect clinical framework. And if you really want to see the molecular machinery, Goodman and Gilman, Chapter 3, Molecular Mechanisms of Drug Action, is the deep, deep dive.
Go read them. We've given you the map, but the treasure is in the chapters.
Thanks for joining us for the deep dive.
See you on the next one.